Hello, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Choose of Ages here, giving a replacement follow-up video to the main reason Caitlyn episode that I put out, because she was reworked slightly since that episode, and the marksman patch and the preseason patch and stuff happened, so I need to address a couple of the previous episodes. One, I'm just going to quickly hit on Talon. Because as of the recording of this video, they've kind of just fucked over 80 assassins in general. Talon is worse than he's been since they removed his passive. I mean, his not passive, but they removed his silence a while back. I mean, it's ironic that the tank meta didn't kill him, because he's still tier 1 on most lists that had like a god tier. He was still a tier below the best tier throughout the tank meta, and at some points in the Juggernaut meta, he was tier 1 or god tier, depending on. He was top tier slot, though still not frequently played throughout the Juggernaut meta. But when the AD damage dealing patch comes about, that is focused on marksman, comes about, that is what makes him drop down. That is what kills him, because very few masteries currently, although they're putting more in for assassins, and they nerf most of his core items, and they've like pretty much his build is completely changed from what it used to be. Which, hey, I would like multiple Talon builds, so I'm okay with that. But fuck, I miss Tiamat being actually good until you. I mean, it's still okay for like adding that extra bit of burst damage, but I miss that freaking passive that it used to have, the cleave thing. That was so important on multiple characters that I play. That hit Pantheon too. Anyway, it's Caitlyn that we're going to be focusing on today, because honestly, she's fallen down a bit. I mean, she always had a lowish win rate and hasn't been in favor for a long time. She used to be like the best ADC in the game. But then they made Caitlyn 2.0 in the form of Jinx, and she's always been worse than Jinx since. Then the Marksman update came about, and they clarified her identity, separating her from Jinx, and she's still worse Jinx. But isn't just, Jinx. But Brad, if that makes any sense. She has an identity aside from her kit being functionally very similar to Jinx. The main issues in her kit aren't actually being addressed in any follow-up patches, because they're just changing the damage values on things that already had decent damage on them. The Q, when they changed it, actually was a damage buff in all but the second through third targets past the first that you hit. After that point, it either broke even or was a buff to damage, because the base damage was augmented 20%, and the successive targets' diminished damage was flatlined to 40 instead of scaling up to 40 and then to 50. And also they added a mechanic where if a target is recently hit by a trap, the Q will do maximum damage to them regardless of how many targets you've hit. So, all in all, it was a very minor nerf. It was a buff to first target and every target after, from fourth and beyond. And the projectile initially was narrowed slightly, but inconsequentially. If anybody tells you that projectile is so narrow they can't hit shit, they wouldn't hit shit with the Q anyway. I've only missed it because of the width twice in my past 10 games. So, yeah, Caitlyn players will not have a big issue hitting people with that Q. And it does more damage in the most common scenario that you're using it in for the majority of the game. It's a bit of a team fight nerf, but it's still doing its job pretty much equivalently to how it was doing it before. The net doesn't do that much less damage. It is narrower, but it's not noticeably narrower, and feels like it is slightly longer range. Same thing with the Q. It feels like it goes slightly further, but it might be inconsequential or just an illusion. and the traps not dealing damage isn't the reason why they suck now. None of those things are the issue with Caitlyn right now. And none of those changes to any of that is the most troublesome nerf she was given. The most troublesome nerfs she was given, well, one of them, and the major deal applies to the traps, but the major nerfs that hit her really hard in functionality was she gets 10% less attack speed from items now. So the main thing that was keeping her from being a priority pick is worse now. So yeah, that's the thing. And also her passive headshot damage most easily builds off a stat that is most easily available on attack speed items that are less effective on her than every other character on the game. That's an issue. There's only 2 crit chance items that also grant you AD and don't grant you attack speed. So you only have 2 item options, which are expensive. But one of them has a very efficient build path to actually build to your passive without building a stat that you don't use good, that you don't scale as well with anymore. And while technically you should, in my opinion, be maxing W second now to get more traps, it's actually slightly less reliable and slightly less good than it used to be, but for not the reason people are saying it is. Has nothing to do with the damage not being there. The fact that it doesn't have its own damage is the furthest thing from the issue with it that could possibly be. Excuse me, I'm a little sick. But anyway, the issue is the trigger range is ludicrously small now because you have more traps. Previously, you could zone off a lane with 1 trap. They could still path around it, but if you hit a trap near in the space in the lane next to a ruined tower between it and the further wall, nobody could pass through that unless they had something that could blink past it, or they passed around that narrow section in the wall there. Now, an entire team of 5 people could pass through that with minion block getting in their way and not trigger it. You need 2 traps in that spot, and still 1 person could pass through it if they clicked the movement path and carefully controlled it and there were no minions in the way. You need 2 traps to block that small bit of an area. You could previously block a narrow jungle exit entrance into the lane with 1 trap. We're talking something that you could barely fit 2 champions standing side by side in. Barely. One of them would have to be one of the smaller models for them to stand side by side in that area. It barely fits 1 person in that gap. 1 trap in there now, it's easy to path around it. If you click beside it specifically to go around it, you could path through it. I've seen people just casually breeze right through it. The trigger range is so fracking small. I've seen people step on the teeth with the foot of their champion and not trip it, when previously the trigger range was a small aura around it. So far, only stepping directly on the cupcake in the center is reliable for triggering it. That is just tiny. That's the span of half a Teemo. I mean, anybody can avoid that trap. These days, I'm more surprised when my traps actually are triggered by champions than when, they're not. I could put a trap in a point that would always work, and I'm surprised if it does. That's a big issue. I'm not saying revert it back to the old size, because that would be stupid if you had 5 of them. I'm just saying, if you step anywhere on the trap's actual graphical representation, you trigger it. I'm tired of people stepping on the teeth of traps and not triggering it. I am freaking sick and tired of having a trap here and having a trap here where their teeth are lined up in a line where you could draw a line between them, and could like draw a line between the space beyond, slightly beyond the teeth in both. And I'm tired of somebody walking straight over both of them. Just straight down, as if nothing were there. I'm fucking sick and tired of that, Riot. Step on the teeth, get bit. Do it. I'm fine with that trigger range. I'm tired of people stepping on my traps and the traps not being triggered. I'm fine with no aura beyond the graphical representation of the trap, but the graphical representation of the trap should be the trap's area of effect. I'm salty. Also, it seems that CC no longer chains as smoothly as it used to it, and it's inconsistent as well. I've had Blitzcranks yank people directly on top of the cupcake of the trap and it not trap them, but then follow up with a knock-up, and where they fall back onto the trap, a trap that's been armed for a while, mind you, before the yank knock-up happened. It was there for a while. Yank, nothing. Knock-up, boom, trapped. I've had knock-ups happen from a Jana as I was placing a trap directly underneath a person. The knock-up occurred as the trap was going down, and it armed before they came down. Nothing. They were directly on top of the cupcake. Nothing. Zip. Nada. Morgana roots. Trap. Directly underneath them. Arms. Before the freaking root ends. They're on the cupcake. They not only walk right off of it, they walk over it again and don't trigger it. And that thing with the yanking onto the trap doesn't work, but the knock-up, which is a form of CC that has shielded in a previous example, does it. It seems like the trigger, there's some like delay or something in the trap being triggered. It is subjectionally caused by CC. Maybe connected to the fact that because you can spam traps, they added a window of 4 seconds where you are immune to traps if you've been triggered by it, if you've hit a trap. It might be related to that coding. Which, by the way, that's a little too much too. I'm perfectly fine with some delay in trap immunity, but 4 goddamn seconds? That's enough of a window in which they could freaking get hit by a trap and then freaking trigger their dance animation directly on another trap, go through the entire cycle, and then step off of it. 4 goddamn seconds of complete immunity to my traps? I mean, I'd be fine with 3. 4, I mean, that extra second, not seeming like it's just 1 second, but sure, give a nice window where they're completely they can't be chain trapped. It would be broken if I could just trap, headshot, drop a trap, and then by the time the route ends, boom, you're done. But the route of the trap is 2 seconds long, and a second window to where you're completely immune to traps is longer than it seems, because the arming time of the trap is 1 second, is 1.5 seconds. So if you're triggered by a trap and somebody like headshots, you still have a full 0.5 second window beyond the duration of the trap to get off of the trap they've placed under you, which is a long time in MOBA formula. But just don't even necessarily need to remove the 4 seconds. I'm sure it's reasonable in a lot of situations, and people that are like not good about moving need the 4 seconds. Okay, I'm willing to accept the 4 seconds as long as the trigger range is put to like existing again. I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that, as long as the traps can be triggered consistently. in an illogical manner. But the traps just plain fucking suck right now. Uh, and the ultimate is kind of lackluster now, but it still has its functionality where you can like execute an enemy from far away with it. But the sheer fact that your passive outdamages it until rank 3 past your second item, it's just like really lackluster. You could do more damage, and if it's a net or trap proc at mostly the same range as like your ultimate, unless you're out of range of an auto attack, the ultimate really doesn't have any use because you're going to be dealing more damage with your auto attacks. And I can understand the utility. I can understand not changing it. I can understand it's a decent ultimate. It's just does it really carry this level of power an ultimate normally has? It's kind of a little lackluster compared to similar ults. Yeah. But anyway, it has its functions, it's useful, it's utilitarian. I'm okay with how it is. Maybe some slight quality of life buffs would be nice, but it's still okay, it's still good, it still has its functions. I'm not really going to bash too hard on it. It's not an issue, really. Some mana refund on it if it doesn't go. If the channel time is cancelled before the bullet fires because you're CC'd or the target's killed, a little bit of like a partial mana refund would be really nice. Quality of life buff. But yeah, the main reasons are the things she builds to are items that are less effective on her is an issue, which they can't really address without changing the identity thing. I can understand that. And it's not as like a super enormously game-changingly bad issue, but it is there. It's one of the main issues keeping her from being really good. Is like she has low attack speed and no attack speed steroid, and her traps are inconsistent as fuck. If they fixed the traps where the graphical representation represented where you could trigger them, and like did something about the buffer shield that CC seems to grant, then it would be manageable. It would be okay if you were a Caitlyn player of great consistency. If you were a reasonably skilled, it would bring her up to a more balanced win rate issue. It would be like bringing her up to 50, maybe. If just fixing the traps would probably knock up her win rate 2% to 50. Which is like around 50% and above is like where it typically tends to be balanced. Although there's some examples of win rates below that aren't balanced. But yeah, she would be a lot better if they fixed her traps, and it wouldn't be overpoweringly good if they just made it where her traps triggered where they logically should. Like I said, I'd be fine if just the graphical representation would trigger the trap. I'm tired of people stepping on the teeth and not doing anything. But yeah. In conclusion, to this follow-up for the main reason episode on Caitlyn is she's still okay, but be prepared for a lot of frustration with the traps, and she's not really in a super good spot right now. Even more than in the old times, just slightly even more than back before the marksman update. Most other marksmen in the game are better than her, because they have like better sustained damage. You could still do a lot of good with Caitlyn. Heck, I've had like freaking 2.5k crits as freaking Caitlyn. And like just dumpstered and super hyper carried as Caitlyn even now. But there's like a lot of frustration in her kit that needs to be amended. She needs some tuning, some just slight modifications and adjustments and tunings and fixes. Traps need to actually work, stuff like that. And she just didn't get as hyper tuned as most of the other marksmen got. So if you're willing to like work harder somewhat to be a really good marksman in mid to late game, go ahead and pick up Caitlyn. She still is good for learning proper zoning mechanics because she can play at a longer range. So she's still good for that. And her strength is still a reasonably good strength, and she can still carry a game off of that strength if you exploit it properly. Properly zoning the enemies off of the minion wave using your higher than normal auto attack range and zoning ability. You could still do that. She's still a lane bully. It's just like there's some other marksmen that could just like shove her like the fuck back. You need a particular kind of support and a particular kind of composition, and if you play ranked, she's a counterpick to some people, but you'll still need to like actually have really solid marksman mechanics to make use of it. Anyway, this is Cheese of Ages sighing off. Rest in peace, traps. This guy. They're not dead, they're just kind of sucky right now.